It gives me great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists today. Uh, um, now, their full bios I can't get into, but they are very, very impressive, and they're posted on the conference website. Okay, but I do want to introduce them to you properly. And first, I would like to introduce Michael C. Bush, Mr. Bush. Uh, Michael Bush is the CEO of Great Places to Work, a global people analytics and consulting firm that helps companies of all sizes produce better business results by focusing on the work experience for every employee. Headquartered in California, awesome, with operations in more than 60 countries worldwide, even more awesome. Great Place to Work produces Fortune's annual list of the 100 best companies to work for, the 100 best workplaces for women list, the best workplaces for diversity list, and dozens of other distinguished workplace rankings around the world. And it's a real honor to have you join us, sir.
Thank
Now,
you, Laurence.
you're welcome. Yeah. Dr. Miyo Yamashita is the president and chief executive officer of the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation in Toronto. She has held senior roles in healthcare, banking, and technology, including Director of Strategy and Operations for the University of Toronto's Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society. In 2017, the Women's Executive Network recognized her as one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women. And since then, she's gone from strength to strength on a combination of a remarkable intellect and a megawatt capacity for visionary leadership. Dr. Yamashita, a privilege to have you join us in our discussion this morning. Our next panelist is Mathew Mehrotra, who is the Chief Digital Officer at BMO Financial Group. Matt is responsible for driving the digital transformation of the bank's personal, business, banking, and wealth management businesses. Prior to this role, Matt was head of the digital product management, where he launched and scaled BMO's agile transformation in partnership with technology, establishing cross-functional teams to design, develop, and deliver industry-leading digital sales and service experiences for BMO's North American personal banking customers. Now, Matt, that sounds very like a lot of hard work, very complicated, very important, but you also bring, a refreshing insight to the bigger picture. I know this because we've talked, and that I'm very much looking forward to that. So you've got it all going on, okay? And last but not least, Dr. Michael Aldous is associate professor in management at Queen's University, Belfast. His research examines the long-run evolution of business organizations and markets, in particular, understanding how business ownership affects the performance of firms, industries, and economies. Michael has a wide set of experiences in working in communication and business development in both the private and university sectors. He is widely regarded as one of the most insightful business historians in the field, an assertion that I am certain he's wincing at right now, as he always wants to keep the focus on the ideas and not the honors. He's also a co-founder director of the Long Run Institute, and so my frequent partner in crime, along with Professor John Turner. Everybody, a warm welcome to you all. Now, I guess the first question I would have is, in the third decade of the 21st century, what binds employees to their employer? Is it compensation or purpose or social impact or all of the above? But what we're going to do is you can answer that, but we would like to hear from you on your general kind of perspective on employees in the workplace. And we'll start with Michael Bush.
Hello, Laurence. Thank you, and it's an honor to be with everyone today. When I first hear the corporation, I think about this machine that's kind of built to last forever, no matter what, the impact of that machine. And so that makes me not want to be a part of a corporation. So I think instead about a group of people coming together to achieve something that they couldn't achieve on their own. And I think that in terms of what people are looking for, that yes, they're looking for compensation. They're looking for social support. They're looking for work that has meaning. They're looking for an opportunity to grow and make more money to take care of their families. They're looking for feedback. They're looking for challenges. They're looking for equity, and they're looking for fairness and to be respected. So it's a lot of things. It's not one thing, and they don't want to trade one thing for another. So, well, we're going to treat you with disrespect, but pay you more money. That's not really what people are looking for. They feel they should be able to get all of those things, and it's the role of leaders to deliver it. And in terms of resilience, the idea of kind of something snapping back to its original form, I think that we need something more than that in terms of the road forward based on the last 18 months. There are leaders who want things to snap back to the way that things were. Like Jamie Dimon saying every employee will be back in the office on June 1st. Well, that didn't happen. And Jamie Dimon saying Bitcoin is irrelevant. Well, it's kind of relevant. So there are some who want things to snap back to some old way of working. They tend to be leaders. People aren't saying things like that. They tend to be leaders who want things to go back to 2018 and 2019. 2018 and 2019 were not that great for a lot of working people. Matter of fact, they were miserable for a lot of working people, and we thought things couldn't get any worse, but they did. So when you think about the role going forward, leaders are the ones who have to do more than snapping back and have to look forward and create an environment where their employees want to be a part of it, don't want to have the great resignation, as Mona mentioned, want to feel good about the place that they work, want to give 150% where they work. And those companies are, I believe, going forward, the data is showing they're going to be rewarded because those companies that work that way had productivity levels in 2020 that exceeded any time in their history. We've been measuring productivity at Great Place to Work for 22 years. There are companies that had higher productivity in 2020 than they did in the 22 years we've been measuring productivity and have sustained it even through 2021. So it's clear what happens when you connect with people and not the corporation, and you create a system where they're listened to and you're willing to change the way that you work based on them. And leaders aren't trying to make things comfortable for them. Leaders who are saying, I want everybody back in the office, they really are working in the office. They're traveling and things like that, but they want everybody else to work back in the office. What people want is to know that someone cares about them, wants to give them opportunity, wants to pay them more money, wants to challenge them. All these basic things are what people want. And by the way, if you tell a person, hey, you can get those things, but the office is probably the best way for you to get it, they'll go back to the office. If you say you're going to get all those things, but the best way for you to get those things is to work from home, they'll work from home. People want those things more than they want a place.
Thank you very much, Michael. That is a great opening context setting of the contemporary scene, and I've already started to think of some questions. I'd like to go now to Dr. Yamashita for her opening remarks. Dr. Yamashita.
Thanks so much, Laurence. And Michael, thank you so much for those comments about people and connection. I couldn't agree more. I was also smiling, observing that all of our first names on this panel start with M, which I think is a pure coincidence, but is an interesting kind of connection. And I do want to thank BMO and the Long Run Institute for the opportunity to be here today and to foster these great connections around the role of the public corporation and what we can do to foster social resilience and economic resilience in a post-pandemic world. I think you're probably all wondering, what does cancer have to do kind of with all of this? I lead a major cancer charity. And to me, the link between health and prosperity was really rammed home by the pandemic over the past 19 months. In the US, 1 out of 5 bankruptcies is related to cancer, a ratio that's actually expected to increase to 1 in 4 by 2030. And even well before the pandemic, in 2008, a government commissioned review found poor health cost the UK economy around £100 billion per year. Yet our best estimate suggests that healthcare contributes at most about 20% to population health. So let's think about that in the context of employees and employers. It's really so-called wider determinants of health we're learning: low quality, insecure work, poverty, substandard housing, inadequate early years support, education, poor diet, smoking, air quality that actually shape more than 80% of healthcare outcomes. So what can we really do, I think, is the question. And we know that governments, both at a national and local level, have the power to address some of these root causes. And I think depending on your perspective, they are to a greater or lesser extent. But I really think investors and businesses have considerable agency over commercial health determinants. So we think last year about things like investors successfully pushing Tesco PLC to set targets to increase sales of healthy food, or in Canada, a study of 14,000 global employers conducted by Mercer earlier this year, 1,000 of which were in Canada, found that investing in mental health is seen as important or very important by 1 in 2 employees. So just the way we've seen investors become increasingly active on the green agenda, I think as populations age, as over 50 cents on every tax dollar are spent on healthcare in Ontario, and that's a pre-pandemic stat. I think over the course of the next decade, we're really going to see health and health-related issues play an increasingly important role in the lives of individual citizens and employees, in the perceptions of employer brands, and in the purpose of corporations and all organizations. And maybe finally, I've had a 20-year career in corporate Canada, but I've really chosen to focus the next decade of my career in cancer, because I believe the next curve to flatten as a global human community is actually going to be malignancies, defined very broadly. So whether it's a doubling of cancer rates as a result of aging populations over the next 10 years, or a wave of undetected cancer cases from the pandemic, or the malignancies, if you will, of high carbon emissions, deforestation, gender, racial, social inequality, they're all malignancies. And in my view, they're actually really interconnected. So lung, skin, gastrointestinal cancers are going to increase 20% over the next 10 years because of climate change. So a carbon-free world is going to be a cancer-free world. Racial minorities are very underrepresented in many clinical trials, including cancer clinical trials. So we can't really achieve true equality in society without more inclusive representation in cancer therapeutics. But lest you think my answer, to the complex multifactorial problem of healthier populations is really we should all give more money to charity. That's actually not what I'm proposing at all. I do firmly believe that health research and cancer research needs greater funding, but as charities, we've got to stop looking at corporations as kind of where our next check is going to come from, or what corporate brand we're going to put on sponsorship material for a big charitable event. I really think the answer lies in much greater collaborative partnerships between various organizations across various sectors. And I think if we've learned anything from the pandemic, we've seen that overlooking health really comes at a great cost. So the old adage of health is wealth, I think is truer now than ever before. And I believe together we can really create a much healthier world along multiple critical dimensions together over the next decade.
Splendid. Thank you very much, Dr. Yamashita. And yeah, I'm beginning to see, a pattern from the everything is starting to be kind of connected. Everything is being seen in let's say, a more holistic way. as Michael started out talking about, that interconnection between, let's say, the psychology of labor and the importance of place. And so thinking about it in that larger kind of networked way, we are really talking about health, employee health in a kind of 360-degree fashion. So it's very, very interesting, and thank you. Matt, over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Mussio, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure. For context, as you said, I am the Chief Digital Officer at BMO, so I lead a team of several hundred digital technologists that focus on the digital transformation of the bank's customer and employee experience. So a lot of my comments, I think, will reflect that context. I do think, to the overall question, I think before we talk about the workplace, it's really helpful to start with a conversation about the work and how it's changed, particularly the type of work that I would do, but then many skilled workers would be doing in an office environment. And I would say the biggest shift has been, if you look at the past, there was this sort of hierarchical, almost command and control sort of environment that existed in a corporation where direction flowed top down. And I think we've covered that a little bit this morning. And to some of the earlier comments, inputs were measured as opposed to outputs and outcomes. That shift, I think, is well behind us. I think corporations have realized that sort of flexibility, nimbleness, pace, it demands sort of a different way of working. And the heart of that way of working, I think, is empowered cross-functional teams focused on outcomes that are responsive to data and changes in the environment. And I set that context because I think that's actually driven a lot of the shift in the workplace that we have seen. The most tangible manifestation would be sort of, when I started working, cubicles, high walls, offices, no need to talk to anybody here. And that's gone, right? The environment that I left at the beginning of the pandemic was, extremely dense. I sat at a harvest table with 8 other people, with 8 more people behind me and 16 more people over there. And the collisions that fostered and the collaboration that fostered, I think was a really important part of the environment. And corporations made investments in that because at the heart of people working together is that connectivity, and the workplace can really foster that. You mentioned I led a lot of the company's transition to scaled agile ways of working. That's a software delivery methodology, but it's also a set of principles. And I would say pretty confidently that a lot of the value actually just came from getting people together. Like at the end of the day, like you can change processes and all sorts of stuff, but when people start to come together and they form relationships and connection, that's where the magic happens. And I think Michael covered that well, and I agree with that point of view. Then COVID obviously struck, right? And a lot of things changed. So I'd say it's a little bit of a ledger. I think there's been good things and there's been bad things from a workplace perspective, and it would be hard to ignore either side of that. On the good, I would say, definitely there's been an increase in efficiency. Just think about the simple fact that your average person spending 3 hours commuting. So you don't spend 3 hours commuting anymore. Some of that time is probably recaptured for personal life. Some of it's probably focused on work, but for sure, efficiency has increased. And I think even the interactions themselves have become more efficient by definition. But that does lead, I think, to a con, which I'll get to in a minute. The second is, I think, sort of personal lives have evolved and have improved in a lot of ways for some people, right? I think if you think about just my own personal anecdote, right? I have 2 kids. One is just under 1, the other is just over 3. My experience in that first year of their life was fundamentally different. I saw a lot more of my son's first year than I did my daughter's, not because of anything other than the fact that I was here. And so just your presence in your home and personal life, I think that's something that a lot of people reflect on as a positive change. But then you start to look at some of the negatives, and I would say the first and foremost that I've seen is work has become in some ways quite transactional, right? So let's get this task done. Because just the environment doesn't foster collaboration or creativity in the same way. And you see that particularly with teams that focus on that type of work. And I think related to that is you just see less connectivity with real tangible impacts, right? People are talking a lot about the Great Resignation. I'd argue a lot of that comes because people are less connected to their work, their workplace, and the people they worked with. And I think it would be it's false to sort of divide those two things. The reality is, like, some of my best friends are my friends at work, by virtue of the fact that I spend a lot of time with them. And so it's hard to sort of separate everything. And I do think that was a big loss, and people do pay attention to it. And last but not least, I think burnout is a real consequence, and it's burnout that comes from the blurring lines between home and work life. And it's not because anyone's doing anything in particular, it's because the situation doesn't allow for division the same way that it used to. You had your commute to cleanse your head and sort of get into a different headspace. My personal situation is I walk through a door over here and there's my daughter, and right, and she's home from daycare. And so you sort of, things start to blur pretty easily. So I do think the challenge then for the workplace is, like, how do you keep the good, but you sort of reduce the bad, right? Because it's not that it was a totally bad shift or a totally good shift, it was a change and it had pros and cons. And so my view then on the future of the workplace relates to that. And I think, number one, it will be a hybrid environment. I don't believe that realistically anyone's going to go 100% back to office or 100% remote, or at least not for the long run, to use that term, purely because I think there's benefits that have been clearly seen on both sides of the equation, and we'll want to try to capture that. I do think the workplace itself, so the office, it will become more and more focused on collaboration, right? So why are you there? You're there to collaborate, to see people. So what little remnant there was of this sort of the cubicle, high wall, the office with the closed door, I do think that will start to go away. And I think it will focus more on sort of those collisions and fostering that. That'll, of course, evolve the place itself, as I said. I do think, to Michael's comment, it's not going to be a mandated thing. I think it's going to be an enticed thing. It's going to be a thing that leaders will have to step up to this challenge, will create cultures and environments that make people want to come back, not tell them to come back. That's not a successful strategy. I don't believe that over the long run, as people reflect on their experience through the pandemic, that they will say, or they'll respond well to sort of directives. I think they'll respond a lot better. And I think the leaders realize this, to reasons to actually return to the office environment in the workplace. And, very tactical point, but it's really important, is a lot of the stuff in the office environment will have to change really meaningfully. The processes, the tech, the tools, because I think we underestimate not only managing the environment itself, but also all the edge cases that sit around that environment. Like, what if someone's 100% remote? What if they're 100% in the office? How do you connect the two of them and ensure that that's a seamless connection? Because otherwise you can actually have sort of divides start to form in the company. You never want that, right? You really want to be able to bring people together. So I guess my view on the workplace is it's balanced. It's going to try to recapture the best of both worlds, which will be a really hard challenge. And I guess my final point, I would say, I think the jury's still out on whether or not the full benefits of an in-person environment can ever be recaptured, but maybe that's okay. Because there were other benefits that came sort of as we went remote, and the challenge will be balancing those two things over the course of time.
Splendid. Thank you very much indeed, Matt. So we're going from the employee experience to the health experience to the technological and spatial context, also the organizational behavior that Matt's just talked about, the importance of connectivity and efficient interactions, and also the humanity of seeing your daughter grow up as well. A little bit more, which perhaps is something that people want to retain. Thank you very much. And now to Michael.
Thank you, Laurence, and hi, everybody. So in these couple of minutes, I'd like to give you a historical analogue, or as John said, a bit of a historical case to think about the future of the corporation in a world of sort of remote and hybrid work, and the importance of purpose that really builds on some of Judy's comments. So as Judy alluded to, I've been researching how corporations have managed workers at distance in the 18th and 19th centuries. Particularly, I look at the East India companies and corporations that have come after that. And these really thinking about how they manage workers separated by thousands of miles, with communication flowing really at the speed of sail, so no Zoom meetings. probably a blessing. And this created what we think of as a classic principal agent problem. So we have the directors or the principals, the owners of the company in London, and the managers or the agents in India. So how did the directors control their managers and align their interests to ensure performance in line with their expectations and outcomes, and particularly thinking, how do you do this when communication and direct control are highly problematic? So my research shows that the corporations innovated many of the incentives and the control mechanisms that are now standard in the corporate work environment. In the 18th century, the managers going to India would actually take an oath. They would then pay a bond to ensure their good behavior to the company, but in return, they were offered incentives that allowed them to do business on their own account using the company's infrastructure. However, by the late 19th century, this has evolved. We now saw standardized work contracts, these stipulated acceptable behavior, grounds for dismissal, remuneration and bonuses, holiday entitlements. These contracts were drawn up by the corporation's legal counsels. They were tested in court. So we begin to see that this blend of incentive and control mechanisms, although they're continuously innovated and rebalanced across the 19th and across the 20th centuries, the principles are pretty consistent. We have a set of monetary carrots and a set of disciplinary sticks. But what I found really interesting through these historical studies is that in industries and environments where the impact of distance on business success is extreme, particularly thinking about firms doing business internationally, in my case, these corporations were actually outcompeted. And that we find that firms organized as partnerships, often through family and kinship groups, so by this I mean people from shared religious or regional backgrounds, proved far more adaptable and agile. Firms using shared ownership principles with a clear purpose of doing business for the benefit of family groups clearly aligned and motivated their managers to work at distance much more effectively. So, why do I think this is interesting for us today? I think corporations are facing a period of extensive uncertainty, which we've now discussed across the sessions, about how they resolve what I think of as these principal agent challenges. The equilibrium of 5 days a week at corporate HQ, where you're easily monitored and controlled with your monetary carrot and your disciplinary stick, that equilibrium is now punctured. We're going to have more employees working at distance. That's going to lower the direct control corporations can exert over them. As we've talked about earlier in the day, I thought Brian and Mona sort of talked through this very well. You know, we see generational shifts in expectations around career planning and motivation. Gen Z, millennials, this focus on non-monetary compensation is well documented. So what is it that we can offer to these people to entice them to remain working within the corporation? Simply rebalancing these incentive and control mechanisms using these same old principles will be a huge missed opportunity. I think installing whatever version of Pegasus spyware becomes deemed legally acceptable is not going to work. We need to think about, you know, how we control employees beyond the promise of more money. And I think we can look at some historical principles here because we've seen historically the success of forms of shared ownership. And by shared ownership here, I do not mean in a communist or socialist sense of shared ownership, but how we encourage the workers of the firm to become shared owners within a corporation. These actually enable agility and adaptability in complex business environments. Finding purpose that binds people together, replicating the sense of family, these are going to be the incentives that motivate those working in the corporation in the future. I think by thinking along these principles, we're going to build a more sustainable and resilient workforce which have longer run commitments to these corporations going forward. Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, carrot and stick and Pegasus software and some great, fantastic points. Really, really, very much so. And the principal agent, the rehearsal of the principal agent problem is a very live contemporary issue. It's not just about the East India Company, is it? So, so let's go to some questions. The first question that I would have, and this is maybe we'll start with Michael Bush. in the third decade of the 21st century, what really binds employees to the employer? You started to talk about that a little bit and how it is changing, or how people maybe think it's one thing, but it's another, right? So is it compensation or purpose or social impact or all of the above? And how does it apply in practice? We'll start with you, Michael, and then we'll go around the table.
Okay. Thank you, Laurence. Well, from 2020, let's say from March of 2020 to today, we've surveyed 16 million people around the world, all who have had, for the first time in our history, a common experience. So, and all kinds of work. Across every industry, people making $3 a day and people making much more than that, doing knowledge work. So I'm talking about workers and the things that they have in common. What they have in common is that they want to be fairly paid, which means something different depending on where you are in the world. What they have in common is that they want to be feeling some sense of fairness, that, the kind of how long I've been in the company shouldn't affect how fairly I'm treated, or my gender shouldn't affect how fairly I'm treated or my pay. So you can go around the world, those things vary in terms of expectation, but in terms of what people want, they want fairness and equity. Nobody wants to be doing the same work as someone else and, hey, I'm just fine getting paid less because I'm happy to be here. They will accept that if they have no option, but this isn't what people want. And they'd actually like to be working with people that they feel they have something in common with, which is usually a belief trying to do something like, improve human health, like Miyo is doing, because that even adds more meaning to the work. And they want to be around human beings. They want to be around people like Matt who want to see their daughter. They love to be around human beings. This is the social support part. This is what creates meaning at work. And as Matt said, having some friends at work, because you actually are trying to do something similar. You have beliefs beyond wages that link you and combine you. And you know that this organization you're in is not destroying the earth. It's making things better. So people want to be physically safe. They want to have good mental health support and work for somebody who wants to help them with those two things. They want to have a strong sense of well-being, which is their physical health, their mental health, and their financial health. They want the employer to care about how their family's doing financially and not to say, oh, that's just your responsibility, because that's not caring for a person. And by the way, you can't care for a person and destroy the environment. You're being insincere. It's dishonest. So this is kind of the disconnection and the opportunity to sync things up. Leaders often say one thing, but when you watch what they do, you realize it's not consistent. It's inconsistent. And the environment's an important part of that. Equity and fairness. Millennials, people will often say, well, millennials don't care about money. They care about purpose. You take a lower class millennial who grew up in a lower class family, they care about the money. They care about the money. So you can't say millennials. It depends on the life experience and the family that millennial came from. There's no broad brush on generation here. So it depends on the person and what they've gone through. So for a leader, the challenge, which this is all about the leader, people have proven their resiliency. People have proven that. Nobody should question what people can do. In Bogota, Colombia, Toronto, Canada, or Oakland, California, the people have proven what they can do. It's what can leaders do? This is the question. This is the thing we're talking about. What can leaders do? Can leaders change? Matt will never talk to an employee who has a young daughter the same way as he's going to talk about them now. Like, I didn't get any sleep last night. He goes, hey, man, I know all of what you're talking about because he's lived it day in, day out. So this changes him forever. And it changes the relationship he's going to have with his people forever. I hate to say there's a COVID silver lining because there isn't any amidst the tragedy, but humans have changed. Those who allow themselves to have changed. So a leader's role is to get all these things for the people. not to trade it off. Oh, I'm going to pay you, but I'm not going to treat you with respect. Oh, I'm going to pay you, but I'm not going to promote you. I'm only going to promote people who look like this. Okay. So leaders can't do that anymore. People want all these things. They know that it's possible because it's just based on pure humanity. Treating somebody in a fair and equitable way. That's how the organization and the company is going to deliver on this new value proposition. It's as simple as that. You can't say to somebody that, oh, I understand you have a sick child at home. Well, you can't see them 5 days a week because we expect the 70 hours Monday through Friday. Good luck with the sick child. A person's going to hear that and go, do you know what I just went through? Did you just go through something completely different than me? Because I just got my humanity, a big reminder of it, and you seem like nothing happened. So this is the opportunity between the leader's challenge to deliver all these things, Laurence. No trade-off between those things. It's delivering all those things for the people.
Fantastic, yeah, and it's it speaks to leadership character as well, very much, and in your interstitial with those remarks and how things have really changed. Awesome. Dr. Yamashita, can I ask you the same question about what binds employees to their employer?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. It's interesting because in the healthcare sector, in the hospital sector anyway, most people just worked through the pandemic. So we're probably a little bit different at the Princess Margaret than many of the other panelists here. So for the past 19 months, we've been still, having kind of 450,000 cancer patient visits a year. And maybe there's some lessons coming out of that, because I think if you've been a frontline healthcare worker through this pandemic, you've probably been celebrated as a bit of a hero. And the leaders in our organization thought that that was a very compelling narrative that would bind, employees even more so to the Princess Margaret and to other healthcare organizations. But what we found over time is that narrative was actually quite unhelpful. Partly because healthcare workers don't feel heroic. They're exhausted. They've been at risk at least before vaccinations were widely available. And they feel they've come to work to just do their job. So this point, Laurence, about kind of character, what we learned is kind of character, compassion, and kindness was really what kept and continues to keep our healthcare workers going. And there was one day early on in the pandemic, a story that's become quite legendary, when we might remember there were significant shortages of PPE available. You couldn't buy a mask anywhere to, kind of save your life, let alone a roll of toilet paper, right? So one day the hospital CEO walked in, happened to have an extra kind of package of disposable masks in his bag. And there was a ward clerk out in front of the hospital crying because she had been recycling masks and kind of the last one, the ear flaps had torn off. And he reached into his bag and said, "Take mine. In fact, I think I even have more," and kind of gave her all the masks, right? And she said, "Well, what are you gonna use?" And he said, "Look, I've got one. You've been recycling. I'm good." So it's the kind of living by example. It's the simple things around resiliency. But if there's a lesson there, again, kindness, compassion, characters really helped on the healthcare front.
Absolutely, yeah. Some very compelling stories coming out of that, out of our experience. How about you, Matt? You've been name checked a couple of times in these remarks with your daughter. So, what do you have to say?
Thank you, Dr. Mussio. I'm not going to repeat what Michael said, but I do agree with just about everything he said. So I don't want to add there, but I do want to draw out one point which I found pretty interesting. No one's really commented on the work itself. Like, is the work actually interesting? Is it fulfilling? There's this assumption or implicit belief here that, this concept of like control, the carrot and the stick. It's like, well, maybe we should start from first principles, right? Which is that in industries, particularly knowledge-based industries, I would say, and in many others, interesting work motivates people who focus on the desire to change the company or change the customer experience or improve something, and it actually gives them intrinsic satisfaction, right? We as humans actually get satisfaction from driving positive change. I think that's a generally accepted thing. And so I guess I would shy a little bit away from sort of this carrot stick and Pegasus and all this monitoring, because I think a modern corporation, frankly, has realized that you actually have to harness the intrinsic motivation of people to drive positive change if you want to be successful, regardless of the industry you're in. Obviously, the Princess Margaret, that's actually what probably draws a lot of people there, right? Is to drive that positive change. It's not because someone's monitoring them or paying them a paycheck, right? It's a charity, right? And I think that doesn't only apply to charities, it applies to every industry. I love my work. I love what I do. It's really interesting work that drives positive outcomes for customers and communities. And so that's what motivates me. It's what motivates a lot of my team, in addition to all the other aspects of the contract, so to speak, that you've alluded to. So then I think Michael's given a bunch of challenges to leaders, all of which I agree with. The other challenge is make the work interesting, right? Make it fulfilling. Connect people back to the purpose of the organization and why it's there. Because ultimately, I think that's the longest term way to retain talent, attract talent, and drive ultimately the outcomes that the company's looking for, regardless of what type they may be.
Thank you very much, Matt. Yes, there's so many perspectives and angles of vision on the emerging workplace, essentially, and what the future of the corporation's workplace is going to be looking like. I think I'd like to go to Michael a little bit for a follow to Michael Aldous for a little bit of a follow up about the incentive control mechanisms, because they've been discussed a little bit with Matt, and it's true that there is a much broader, say, cultural conception of what is required of corporations now. Right, there's a purpose required. Let's say more leadership character required. There is a number of other elements that coming to the fore. But I wonder, Michael Aldous, whether you'd like to comment on that maybe the persistence of incentive control mechanisms, because if we're looking at the corporation from A to Z, we're also looking at not just financial institutions or not just, let's say, service organizations. We're looking at a great diversity of work experiences, aren't we?
So I would completely agree with Matt's point about the need for fulfilling work. I think that's absolutely critical. I think, of course, the problem is for many people, they don't have fulfilling work. They find working in many of the jobs that corporations offer extremely unfulfilling. And I think so then the way that the corporation manages them in terms of providing these incentives and controls, does begin to play a significant role and will continue to play a significant role. I think the more we can move towards finding mission-driven firms that do allow people to align their own sort of personal vision and mission with them, that's really important. That they can enter and do fulfilling work, absolutely, I would completely agree. But how you're then sort of going to align people and manage them, I think that's we really need to think about that. I think moving beyond this idea of pure sort of monetary compensation, and how we incentivize people and how we link them into the firm so that they feel that they have a place within this, they feel that they have a long-term home within an organization and that they can build a career there, they can spend a lot of time there. I think how we do that and how we think about that is really important. That's why for me personally, I look at these ideas about how you allow people to be an owner of the firm. How do you allow them to actually take part as an owner of the firm? Because I think that's a hugely motivating part. that drives people forward, that they actually know that the effort that they put in is building something that they actually own a part of and can benefit from. So I don't disagree with Matt's points at all. I think they're entirely right, but I do think that corporations are going to have to pay a lot of attention actually to the sort of the incentive mechanisms that they now offer to people in terms of enabling them to feel fulfilled and how they can sort of spend time within these organizations creating something that's meaningful to them.
So the incentive mechanisms, I think, would be they're very kind of aligned with your remarks about who owns the contemporary corporation, isn't it? So to have a sense of belonging, and belonging is I think everybody's mentioned it, and very eloquently so. In the historical context, Michael Aldous, what you've brought out is the tremendous importance of getting, let's say, groups of affinity or family, kind of creating family incentive mechanisms, right? And so there is a kind of a sense of ownership, but we haven't really discussed it. Maybe it's not even part of the discussion about the kind of ownership structure, right? Of the public corporation as a kind of a shareholder organized organized entity. And so that might be something that might be a good idea for perhaps for future research. But we've got so many questions that I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit and ask Dr. Yamashita something. We've talked about how people should respond, and that they should be good to each other, and that they should be kind, and there will be a cost to not doing that. And Michael Bush very eloquently suggested that the game has changed. Okay, the game has changed. But my question would be, more diverse, more purpose-driven workplaces, or are there any costs? Are there any costs to being purpose-driven? Do you give up performance, or is it a more consensual approach to leadership? Or it seems to me that there might be some costs, but what is your view?
Sorry, Laurence, are you asking Michael or asking?
No, I'm asking you. I'm asking you, Miyo. Yeah.
Okay, so your question's on costs. Are there any costs to being
what are the trade-offs, right? Like, what are the, like, should there be, are there any trade-offs? Because it's like, it just seems, when I hear the panel, I think this just makes perfect sense. That it ought to be a purpose-driven institution, that there are incentive mechanisms there, that we should be more kind to each other, and that the pandemic perhaps has permitted us to, have the scales fall from our eyes in some way. Yeah. But my question is, what are there any trade-offs to being a purpose-driven workplace?
I mean, I've definitely seen leaders kind of struggle around living the purpose of an organization, and I've had those moments of struggle myself. So I think for leaders, helping an organization live the purpose and live its purpose, there can sometimes feel like there's a time cost. And for most leaders, get a bit of a zero-sum mentality among leadership, right? Like, if our purpose is X and I got to spend time doing this, and that takes time away from something else. The other thing that I see is kind of a sense of control, but you have to be willing to give up a sense of control and be vulnerable if you're going to really kind of live a purpose. So to put it in a healthcare context, what we're seeing now is real fatigue and burnout among healthcare workers. And, you know, everyone assumes, well, you've kind of had 19 months of this with no real end in sight. So of course, everyone's exhausted. But what's really not talked about as much is like we're actually starting to see a compassion burnout, because a lot of the people filling up the ICUs and kind of responsible for cancellation of other surgeries, including cancer surgeries, is the unvaccinated or under-vaccinated coming into hospitals. And you have to be vulnerable as a healthcare person to say, you know, what's really impacting my compassion here is that I've got this tension between I'm supposed to help everyone in healthcare, and yet we're in the middle of a fourth wave that's actually a preventable, communicable disease now. And it's exposing that vulnerability, creating the conditions for vulnerability, where we continue to live our purpose, at least kind of at the Princess Margaret, around like to deliver a healthier world. So it's kind of cutting through those, you know, those layers around time and vulnerability, I've found.
That's it's such a, I think a lot of us feel that. I think a lot of us feel in the gut. So feel in the gut. So thank you very much. And yeah, it is it's a lot to think about. I think we've got a couple of Q&As, and we've got one for Matt. And please allow me to read it to you. It is ideal that the work be interesting. Okay, you've got some pickup on this this whole interesting thing, right? That the employees be engaged and connected to the work. So for the work that is generally less appealing to most, which Michael Aldous referred to, this person would be interested in Matt's thoughts on whether much of this can be digitized. So if the drudge work, we'll just get a robot to do it, or whatever. Yeah. What do you think, Matt?
I guess I'd answer it in two parts. One is, first of all, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that there's obviously different degrees of inherent interest available in different types of work. Like that is an obvious point. It's just the reality. I do think the big challenge for a leader is to connect the small to the big, right? The work that I do, the small thing that I contribute, what does that ultimately drive in the context of the broader company and its purpose? And the most successful and effective leaders are really, really good at that. And you see them do it, and it's actually an amazing thing, right? People who lead functions that largely involve people in, you know, performing potentially rote tasks, they can actually have teams that are highly motivated and engaged because the people understand why they're there. And so I think that's part one. But then it is true that there will be work that is quote unquote sort of left over at the end, and the question is, can it be digitized? I think a huge amount of work can be digitized, and we've seen that, right? Society has gone through that evolution, right? You think about even in banking, forget digital, in the traditional sense, just think about the advent of the ATM, right? There was a time when that didn't exist, right? When a customer would have to walk into a branch to perform even the most basic transaction. The ATM did shift the nature of work, but then can be digitized. And so I do think a lot can be digitized. I think then the challenge is to be mindful of how you navigate the transition. And I think in a lot of cases, companies actually have been really good at that, because there's just, you know, so much value to be created, so to speak, on the table, that they've managed to navigate employees into new and fulfilling types of work, even as some of the sort of rote tasks have been digitized over time.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think this will be a very, very prominent set of Mona's wicked problems that we're going to have to solve in that in that space, in terms of, you know, AI and human judgment, in terms of you know, the displacement. So there are a lot of kind of unknowns as we kind of lurch forward to a digital first world. I have time for one more question, and I'd like Michael Bush, to take this one on, if you can, sir. If flexible work means some of your workforce stays home and some of it goes into an office, that becomes in some ways a corporate social responsibility question because of its potential to transmit inequality. And in brackets, we heard this from Judy Stevenson a little bit earlier, that some people are at home, some people get to be creative at work, and so forth. Who stays home, who gets to go in, and have ideas and be creative, and so forth. So how do you identify the people to be remote and the people to bring in without kind of creating this I suppose this chasm or this potential inequality between the chosen and the unchosen?
Yeah, and I think the chosen want to work from home, by the way. But so you know, but if you want to focus, but if you want to focus on the question of how to have equity, depending on where people work, well, people who work from home a couple of days a week, you want them to work in the office. People who want to work in the office a couple of days a week, you have them work from home. So that's kind of how equity and fairness can work if you want to solve the place problem, but you're focusing on the wrong thing. The thing that people need to be focusing on are diversity, equity, inclusion, and the sense of belonging. That's what they need to be focusing on. Because if you're focused on that and you're listening to people, you're not going to be in a how do I look at this and how do I make it fair? You listen to the people, and equity isn't about doing the same thing for everyone. It's about doing different things for people because people have different needs and different situations. So you can't get locked into like a fairness issue when it's really an equity issue. And so if you have one rule like that, like, okay, 2 days here, 3 days there, you're blowing it. You're pursuing fairness and you need to be pursuing equity. The other thing is on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And back to the trade-off, kind of that leading question. In the work that I do, when I talk to an executive and I talk to them about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and I will say, okay, here's why you should do it. And they go, okay, can you give me a business case for that? Oh, all right. So you want me to give you a business case for why treating people with respect, in an honest way, fairly and equitably, making sure they're doing work that excites them and they're enjoying the people that they work with. They're a part of a good team and they care about the people they work with, and the people who they work with care about them. You want the ROI on that? Yeah. Can you get it to me by Friday? Okay, I'm like, really? Okay, so if it's a young leader, I will get them the business case. But if it's somebody who's been doing this like 20 years, I don't get them the business case. I just catch an early flight back home and about them. I've been talking about them. Every single, we have different perspectives on this panel, different experiences. We've all been saying the same thing. The other Michael was like, yeah, carrot and stick and blah 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 blah. Well, no, they should be doing meaningful work, but if they're not doing meaningful work, you probably need a carrot and stick. And I think that the opportunity is for people to, yes. And another thing is people will say, entrepreneurs, I'm an entrepreneur, by the way, and I hate to be told what to do. Nobody likes to be told what to do. It's not a differentiation of being an entrepreneur. Nobody likes that. It's just some mindset that, oh, I'm a person who doesn't like to be told what to do, so that makes me an entrepreneur. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes the word control. Nobody likes that word because it's a bad word. It's a disrespectful word. It's not respecting what a person can do and what a person does every day with rent, with mortgages, with sick parents, sick children, and all the complexity that goes on in the world. And you're going to control what they do, and not respect them. I got people working in 60 countries. I'm supposed to be worried about what they're doing every minute and trying to use software to do that? That's going to drive me crazy. I'm going to have a miserable life. But instead, if you treat people in a certain way and you care about them as people, you're not going to be worried about how to have equity on who works at home and who doesn't. You're not going to do that. You're not going to have to, high-speed Wi-Fi, low-speed Wi-Fi. If you respect a person, everybody's getting the same Wi-Fi, okay, which is high speed, as fast as you can get it. So you can do things like this. So it comes back to care. Now, people who think, well, if I care about my employees, I'm losing profitability, good luck. I don't have any advice for those people. They can do other things, and God bless them, and great. But we're talking about resilience and a transformation here. That's about connecting with people, each person, not treating them as an employee, but treating them as a person. And people need different things. You focus on that, personalizing the way your company works, you're going to win.
Yes.
You're going to win.
Fantastic. And I couldn't have engineered a better way to, you know, to end this fascinating panel on the future of the public corporation and the workplace than with Michael's closing remarks. And my sincere appreciation to each of our panelists today, and just an excellent discussion.